The following program contains material that some viewers may find distressing.
Antisemitism is not just a problem for the Jewish community. It eats away at the very core of who we are as a people, as a free people.
I just knew that it would be seized upon.
It's about deep-seated prejudice.
I think it's a failure to learn from history. The age of innocence has been shattered.
Universities are ground zero for anti-Semitism.
There's no amount of harassment that is going to change whatever the outcome is in the Middle East.
Your race, your people committing genocide.
Hamas was a self-defense.
That's about creating terror and fear.
So we support Hamas. I love Hamas and Hezbollah.
And it's an ultimate expression of hate.
From the river to the sea.
So there's double standards. You need to look at the bigger picture here.
Arrested? For doing what? Having a flag.
If now is not a time to stand up, I don't know when is.
If we can find a way of getting better education, a better understanding about what is going on and the pathways to peace, we'll be in a much better place than we are now.
Thank you for your strength.
I'm Josh Frydenberg and I'm a proud Australian Jew. I'm shocked by the explosion of anti-Semitism across our country, and I'm using my voice to ring the alarm bell. With our fundamental freedoms and values under daily attack, combating anti-Semitism is not just the Jewish community's fight, it's Australia's fight. This is a call to action. The words "never again" must actually mean something.
Anti-Semitism, tragically, is one of the oldest forms of prejudice, and we can track across thousands of years the way that it's done its evil work in the world.
Hatred, discrimination, anti-religious feeling, despising the Jewish people, it knows no logical description or definition. It's just completely unacceptable.
Watching what's happening today in Australia, Hitler would be giving thumbs up to those radical elements who are trying to breach this great pillar of Australia's national character. Hitler would be proud.
We have breaking news out of Israel this morning where Hamas has launched a surprise attack within Israel's borders overnight.
October 7, 2023, Hamas terrorists launched a devastating surprise attack on the people of Israel.
They set out on that day to deliberately kill innocent civilians. That's what terrorists do. They seek to terrorise a population. Therefore, they engage in the most horrific of atrocities against people.
When the news first came through, I was firstly deeply shocked that such an attack was possible, horrified for the people who were caught in the middle of it, those who lost their lives, those taken hostage, and I was very anxious.
It started with rockets, hundreds of them. Then came the ground attack and the unspeakable brutality.
If you listen to the conversations between the Hamas terrorists, and I've listened to the conversations in Arabic, they did sound like ISIS. Hamas did behave like ISIS on that day.
Hamas has kidnapped scores of people, women and children, to use as bargaining chips.
More than 200 Israelis were taken hostage, and over 1,200 innocent people were murdered. It's the greatest loss of Jewish life in a single day since the Holocaust.
I was astonished and outraged, and I had a sense of foreboding that this would lead to an enormous outbreak of anti-Semitism and persecution and protest, and that harmony would be disrupted all around the world.
And sadly, Sir Peter was right.
Live from Greenacre.
In Western Sydney, within hours of the attack, an impromptu street parade erupted in jubilation over Hamas's actions. For some, this was even a joyous occasion.
I'm smiling and I'm happy. I'm elated. It's a day of courage. It's a day of happiness. It's a day of pride. It's a day of victory. This is the day we've been waiting for.
And this was also the day that marked the turning point for Jewish people everywhere. "48 hours after Hamas started the war in Gaza, landmarks around the world turned blue and white in a show of solidarity with Israel and the Jewish people. But it was here in Sydney, when the sails of the Opera House were lit up, that a baying mob was triggered, and it was unlike anything we'd ever seen before. A so-called peaceful protest that included the burning of the Israeli flag and vile chants of anti-Semitism.
You know, I thought I'd never hear words like "where are the Jews" or "where are, gas the Jews," whatever the words, they were words of hate.
Surely, in the modern world, in modern Australia, we're better than that.
This is a peaceful place. Like, you look at the peace around it now.
Yeah.
That's what it should be all the time.
For Nova Peris, Olympic champion and former Labor senator, the raw emotion displayed that night underscored a deeply troubling reality.
For people to have come here 2 days after a mass slaughter within a matter of hours, and they've celebrated that, Josh, what normal person can think that that's okay? It's unhinged, and it's a sickness, and it's something that should never have been tolerated in this country.
The point that needs to be made is all this vitriol, this bile and hate directed at all Jews occurred before Israel had even responded in self-defense to the Hamas attacks. Did you ever think that a conflict far away, thousands of kilometres away from our shores, would have such a disrupting influence here in Australia with the rise of anti-Semitism?
We've had similar events that have tended to unify us. We look at the attacks of 9/11, we look at the closer-to-home attacks in Bali and other acts of terrorism. They, in their way, have caused us to reach out and embrace each other. For some reason, we are seeing that something as violent and as horrible as the events of October last year in Israel have in fact divided the community.
Did you ever think you would see that here in Australia?
No, I was quite shocked, and still remain, I'd use the word shaken.
Archbishop Peter Comensoli, the leader of the Catholic Church in Melbourne, suggests that anti-Semitism may be ingrained in the cultural fabric of certain segments of our society.
I think there is something perhaps deeper within where anti-Semitism has been there, under the surface, and it just needed a spark and it came to the surface. And that is why I think this is so deeply troubling, not only that it has arisen, but it so easily arose and so explicitly.
Following October 7, Israel was left with no choice but to defend itself.
Please stop ripping posters down. These are innocent civilians in Israel.
Yet for the protesters, it's as if the State of Israel had no right to respond, no right to free its hostages.
From the river to the sea! 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 Palestine will be free!
From the river to the sea. It's a phrase commonly chanted at anti-Israel demonstrations worldwide.
From the river to the sea! Palestine will be free!
Thank you for riding the Sydney trains, and remember, from the river to the sea.
It's a call for a Palestinian state from the Jordanian River in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west, wiping Israel from the map altogether.
It argues that the land, all of it, is Muslim-owned land, and no Muslim is entitled to give up 1 inch of it to a non-Muslim. And the way to achieve this is through jihad.
They're actually chanting genocide, chanting from the river to the sea, chanting Palestine will be free. You're actually inciting violence, and you're inciting hatreds towards the Jewish community.
It's a very violent statement.
Dennis Richardson is Australia's preeminent authority on security and intelligence, having led ASIO, the Departments of Defence and Foreign Affairs, and served as our ambassador to the United States.
Statements such as from the river to the sea are statements essentially advocating the extinction of Israel as a state.
On the issue of the river to the sea, Dennis Richardson described it as an extremely violent statement.
It is.
And so it has no place on our streets.
I agree.
What you saw on the 7th of October is a statement of what Hamas is and stands for.
Israel has every right to drive towards the extermination of Hamas. Every right. If Hamas is not defeated, then it will regroup and come again.
If an event like October the 7th happened here in Australia, what would be your advice to government?
To pursue them as vigorously as possible, as long as it takes, wherever it takes us.
Get the f***ing Jews wiped out!
And Dennis Richardson has identified how tensions in the Middle East have led to Australia's Jewish community being targeted.
There are sections of the Australian community who do see people of the Jewish faith, wherever they are around the world, as part of Israel. Therefore, statements of violence against Israel can very easily flow over into actions of violence against communities in our own country.
And that is exactly what happened. Here in Caulfield, the heart of Melbourne's Jewish community, on this very spot, on the eve of the Sabbath, right in front of the synagogue, our house of worship.
Oh, the pepper spray's out! Stay back! Stay back! Shame on the police! Shame on Victoria!
Both these sprayers being deployed.
Things got way out of hand when a group of pro-Palestinian protesters turned up. They were seeking retribution for the firebombing of a local hamburger shop. Rumours circulated that members of the Jewish community were responsible.
If the police can't protect our business owners, then we're going to come protect them.
You can't do this! You can't do this, you broke it.
As police struggled to maintain order, local Jewish residents were denied access to their own homes.
That's where we leave. That's our home. That's our home. Where do you want to go? That's my house. Oh, it's not safe for them to leave. Well, you guys are here.
Victoria Police conducted an investigation into the firebombing, and it turned out it wasn't the Jews after all. But the dangerous events of that night had a lasting impact on the Jewish community, with more to come. Let's look at the statistics. In just 8 weeks following October the 7th, there was a 738% increase in the number of anti-Semitic attacks. And since then, the number of attacks has continued to soar.
This is the tip of the iceberg. It's happening in every segment of society, in professions, in the schoolyard, in universities. It's happening in regional Australia. It's happening in the capital cities, places with no Jews and places with many Jews. There's a momentum to anti-Semitism, and it's difficult to know where this will lead.
7th of October is the bloody beginning of it. You're going to have plenty of 7th Octobers coming. Plenty of it.
I've lived in Melbourne all my life, and I've never experienced anything like this.
Adam Yee is a music teacher in Melbourne. He was verbally abused and harassed just days after the Hamas attack.
I first realised that things had changed suddenly and for the worse when I'm walking out of my local supermarket and 2 men walk past me in quite confrontational way and say, "F you, Jew." You know, for a while I was thinking, oh, it's time to cover up, you know, tuck in my ritual fringes and to stop wearing a kippah in public. And I thought, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to give them that victory.
From the supermarket to the schoolyard, to be visibly Jewish means you are now a target.
The boys at my school can't play sport anymore. They're not allowed off campus to do that. My daughter has been told that she needs to cover up any Jewish symbols. The necklace that her grandmother gave her, she can't wear it anymore. She's got to tuck it in or leave it at home.
Who's telling her that?
The school. Her Jewish school is saying you should not look visibly Jewish on the streets of your own suburb anymore.
For fear for her safety.
For fear for safety.
Australia has been a wonderful country until now. All of a sudden, we feel threatened.
And it's not just the younger Jewish generation. 93-year-old Holocaust survivor Egon Sonnenschein lives in Sydney. He's endured the very worst of anti-Semitism, and he's extremely alarmed at its resurgence. Do you feel scared?
Absolutely. You know? I'm scared and I'm upset. And I never thought that in my lifetime I will be able to experience such a thing.
This outpouring of anti-Jewish sentiment goes far beyond the individual.
The targeting of a business because it happens to be owned by someone who happens to be Jewish is, in my view, anathema to what Australia represents. It's not who we are. And that's why we need to call out anti-Semitism when we see it.
No matter how big or how small, Jewish businesses have been targeted in the most shocking way.
We just moved a lot of things out of here on Friday, so it's feeling very empty at the moment, which is quite sad.
I've come to speak to Joshua and his wife Maggie Moshe.
Hello.
In the Melbourne suburb of Thornbury. Maggie and Joshua, notice the sign there.
Yeah.
In a world you can be anything, be kind.
I wanted that to be the thing that underpinned everything that we did here.
They opened this high street business 7 years ago. Today, the shelves are empty. Their business closed. This Jewish couple, the victims of anti-Semitism.
October 7 happened, which was obviously very devastating. Not long after that, we started noticing quite a bit of tension with some of our customers and some people that we worked with as well.
Joshua is also a professional musician. Following October 7, he joined a WhatsApp chat group that was set up to support the Jewish creative community. It soon had over 600 members. 3 months later, his personal details were made public. It's what's known as being doxed.
We got horrible abusive messages. We had our store vandalised numerous times, and we also had death threats on our phone, not just against us, but really concerningly our child.
How old's your child?
He's 5.
I felt incredibly hurt, violated, and I feel like I've been explicitly told to make a choice. If you want to be a Jewish creative in Australia, you must be vocally anti-Israel, or else you will not be accepted. I come from a long lineage of proud Jewish people that have stood up and faced and survived this and more for many thousands of years. And I come from that lineage, and I am stronger than any of these people think.
Thank you. As Maggie was getting ready to finally close her family business, a passerby gave her the finger. The young mother was at breaking point.
I just also really don't want to fucking leave here because I've put a lot of energy and time into this place and this business, and to have it ripped away from us like this is just horrible and unfair and uncalled for, and it helps no one.
That's why we're doing it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your strength. It's gonna be okay. Another member of that Jewish Creatives WhatsApp group was the musician Deborah Conway.
Blow the horn, give a voice to all the mournful souls who search to be reborn tonight.
What does your Jewishness mean to you?
It's indivisible from me. It's my childhood, it's my family, it's my future family, my children. It's how I relate to the world.
Forgiveness like the sharpest knife, oh God, inscribe me in the book of life. I've been hungry since before the dawn.
Also in the group, her husband and musical collaborator, Willie Zigier. Both were targeted and both were doxed.
People are saying the most shocking thing about Jews, and we just asked to sit back and go, well, they didn't say gas the Jews, so what are you worried about? It's unbelievable.
Deborah and Willie live in Melbourne. They carry their Jewishness with pride.
Hi, Deb. Hi, Will. How are you? Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
It's been very obvious that Israel has been demonised for a long time. Every time some kind of conflagration happens in the Middle East, there's a pile-on. But this recent October 7th events, the anti-Semitism, the anti-Jew hatred for Jews around the world, the diaspora Jews, it's out of the ballpark. You know, we're just seeing things that we have never seen before.
So, Deborah, were you part of a list of 600 Jews who were doxed?
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
I felt that it was very cruel of the people that did that. Because this deep anti-Semitism has come mostly from the left this time. They were feeling particularly betrayed by their colleagues, by their places of work, sometimes by their bosses, and they were sharing these experiences with each other, and it was important for them.
The history of the Jew lurches through chapter and verse of persecution for multitudes of contradictory reasons.
Not only were Deborah and Willie doxed, they were also cancelled.
And throughout history, Jews pay with blood. Maybe all a Jew can do is pace the stage and pray.
I was asked to do an ABC interview by a publicist working for a promoter that we were doing some shows with. And then on the day of the interview, I was told via the publicist that the producer had just arrived back from overseas and I was too hot property, too controversial to have on a light entertainment show.
Deborah Conway went to the press and the interview eventually took place.
I feel like if it was directed at any other group in our society, if this the kind of hate that was being directed at Aboriginals, at trans people, at gay people, there would be outrage. There would be an outcry amongst all of our ruling institutions. But because it's the Jews, it's okay.
Resistance is justified when Palestine is occupied. Resistance is justified when Palestine is occupied.
Rather than tackling anti-Semitism head-on, many leaders have turned the other way, creating a more dangerous situation for us all.
That there's some justification or some tolerance level, just a little bit of anti-Semitism is okay, that thought has crept into the national psyche or into the psyche of some of our leaders, but I think is an abomination.
No one should be attacked for who they are in this country, and what is occurring is something that is unacceptable.
For John Howard, there was a missed opportunity for our leaders to prevent this rise in anti-Semitism.
From the get-go, the Prime Minister of this country didn't say, whatever our differences are on other issues, one thing we must unite on is to completely repudiate any return of anti-Semitism. And I believe that if, from the beginning, the horrible events the 7th of October had been denounced in unequivocal terms. No if, buts, maybes, no equivalents, none of that. From the very beginning, you would not have had quite these outbreaks. Because part of the role of being a leader of a country is to set a tone.
What do you think of the response to the events in Australia by our leaders?
I'd like all the leaders, and in particular, you know, our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, to be more firm on what is happening in this country and to stamp out and get a hold before it gets worse.
As Prime Minister, how concerned are you specifically about the rise of anti-Semitism in Australia since October the 7th?
Well, I find it devastating, and I'm particularly concerned that some of that rise appears to have been amongst younger generations coming through.
This is a piece of illustration that we will not continue to be harassed. This man needs to leave immediately. And you people, every f***ing time you dare to show your face, you Israeli-loving genocide supporters, we will be here, we will not leave, and we will stand our ground. You are supporting the most barbaric genocide we've seen in decades.
I worry because it seems that to some degree there are people who are so fixated, perhaps so biased, that they will go to any lengths to continue the philosophy of some level of extermination, some level of expulsion of a nation-state's majority population, and that others just join on the bandwagon, jump on the bandwagon, and are parroting those sorts of slogans that really are the next best thing to inciting violence.
I am not calling for peace or ceasefire anymore, and say whatever you want to say about me. I'm not calling for that. No ceasefire, no peace. Because peace, that's their world, the colonizer world. Liberation is our world. Liberation is what we are after. Liberation is what we want. Liberation is not a slogan. Liberation is a demand, and that's our demand.
We've got people in our country who are calling Australia home when they don't have Australia in their hearts.
How do we balance the right to free speech with what has clearly been an incitement of hatred?
Well, you apply the test of common sense. If it is all about attacking somebody because they're a Jew or because they're a Catholic or because they're a Muslim, it's not free speech. It's hatred and discrimination.
When it comes to the law, there's existing legislation in place that prohibits discrimination based on religion and race. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, we have to ask ourselves, are the laws already in place being actually enforced?
I do believe that there is a breach of the existing laws, both at a state and federal level in some of those instances. We can beef laws up tomorrow, and I'm not opposed to the prospect, but I think we should utilise the existing laws now. And if we do that, we send a very clear message to others.
Dennis, do you think we need tougher laws in Australia to ensure that people are punished for inciting violence and indeed for carrying it out?
The laws certainly need to be reviewed. I think a lot of people are puzzled as to why some call so openly for violence and no action appears to be able to be taken.
One of my concerns is that there are laws there that I don't think have been implemented. Let's reinforce what's there. If people are breaking the law, then they should be prosecuted. That's why we have laws.
So what is different about this explosion of anti-Semitism and hatred? The targeting of Jews was once the preserve of the far right. Not anymore.
The Jewish lobby and the Zionist lobby are infiltrating into every single aspect of what is ethnic community groups.
Here's New South Wales Greens MP, Jenny Leong.
Their tentacles reach in to the areas that try and influence power. And I think that we need to call that out and expose it.
Tentacles. It's a despicable anti-Semitic slur that evokes memories of the Nazi era. And here's Federal Greens MP, Marine Faruqi.
You are watching the massacre of thousands of Palestinians by Israel, and you are not condemning Israel.
And just after the Hamas terrorist attack, the Federal Senate chamber became a place for protest.
Free Palestine!
Thank you, Senator Faruqi.
I'm extremely disgusted with the Greens' behaviour.
Order.
I think they're a political party standing in solidarity with terrorism.
Federal Labor MP Fatima Payman faced the media.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
The next day in the Senate, the Liberal Senator Simon Birmingham introduced a motion condemning the phrase.
This motion notes that the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," opposes Israel's right to exist.
With bipartisan support, it passed 56 votes to 12. It was a rare moment of unity and sanity in the chamber, in a debate that has been dominated by the extremists.
The matter is resolved in the affirmative.
So we see very little distinction now between far left and far right ideology. They have fallen for the same conspiracies. They are steeped in the same hatred. The only difference that I've observed is that the far right is more in touch and open about its hatred, whereas the far left still believes that it's fighting against racism when it's actually advancing the cause of racism by trading in this ancient hatred.
I'm a Jew of the left. I edited a paper that was considered to be left of centre.
Michael Gowenda is a former editor of The Age newspaper. He believes the left side of politics has turned its back on Australian Jews.
This business that Zionism is just evil, it's now widespread in sections of the left. It's just
It's just a truism. Zionism is evil. Israel has to be wiped out.
Calling Israel a colonial state, apartheid, genocidal, is simply historical fantasy.
All these labels, I see them in the context of this campaign to delegitimize Israel and vilify Jews even.
Khalid Abu Toma is a journalist and Arab citizen of Israel.
And I belong to the 2 million strong community inside Israel, the Arab community. Most of us are Muslims, more than 90%. We believe in wonderful things that Israel stands for: strong economy, democracy, freedom of speech. We don't take these things for granted. And if Israel were an apartheid state, I would not be permitted to purchase a house in a Jewish neighborhood. And if Israel were an apartheid state, my daughter would not be permitted to study in a Jewish college or university. And it doesn't really help me, the Arab Israeli citizen of Israel, to delegitimize Israel. I want to live with Israel. I don't want to destroy Israel.
The protesters have convinced themselves they are countering racism, when in fact they are promoting it. There it is again, from the river to the sea. This time from students at Sydney University.
I feel very anxious about coming to university. I try to avoid it as much as possible. It's actually really bad.
Freya Leach is a student at Sydney University. She has seen our higher education institutions turn into a breeding ground for anti-Israel and anti-Semitic sentiment.
Universities are ground zero for anti-Semitism. And then since October 7, it's just given them more justification, more ability to make these anti-Semitic comments, because now they can claim it's just because of what Israel's doing.
The anti-Israel and anti-Semitic protests by university students have spread quickly around the world. From America to Europe, campsites have turned into battlegrounds, inciting violence and hate. Australia is now following suit.
The dozens of Jewish students I've spoken to say the majority feel like campus is a hostile, horrible place where at any time they can be targeted by radical protesters on the streets.
It worries me that people get their understanding of history off social media without ever touching any of the real facts.
Your race, your people committing genocide.
And because of that, I think particularly young people are developing views about this which are unbalanced and really not informed by the history in any way.
As an Arab citizen of Israel, I also felt unsafe on several campuses. And I told these people on the campuses, if you really care about the Palestinians, why don't you do something positive to help the Palestinians? Why don't you, for example, come to Gaza and defend the rights of women and gay people living under Hamas? That's called pro-Palestinian. And they didn't have an answer.
If I look around and I'm hearing consistently from people that October 7 didn't happen, that Israel needs to be eradicated, that Jewish people are just trying to play the victim card, these are going to be the future leaders of our country. And this is the kind of stuff that they think. That is incomprehensible. It's a terrible sign about where we're going to be heading unless the leadership now steps up.
With protests at our universities and campus camps of hate being established across the country, it is clear many of our universities are no longer safe spaces for their students.
I have a right to be here.
We've seen young kids at Sydney University being taught and encouraged to chant slogans of which there could be no comprehension as to what they mean.
5, 6, 7, 8, Israel is a terrorist state.
You know, you set up a tent to send a message to the Israeli government about Gaza. How is that got any prospect of advancing a cause? And what we're seeing isn't intellectual engagement or discourse. What we're seeing is a promotion of simplistic slogans and in some cases a promotion of hate. And there is no place for that whatsoever.
And so your words are very strong on what is happening there, but we need to go to the next step to ensure that, again, it's a safe space, Prime Minister.
It does need to be a safe space.
What is your message here to Australian Vice-Chancellors and indeed school principals?
Uphold the principles which underpin the foundations of your institutions.
And if they don't?
If they don't deserve to be in their jobs.
Get out of here. You're not walking here. I said, who would like to visit the camp? I don't give a shit. This guy listen to me. Get out of here.
And it's not just our universities that need to be held to account.
There has been a failure of institutions. I mean, where's the Human Rights Commission on all this? Where have they been? What have they said? You know, they have been given evidence of hate speech. They were asked to investigate the things that were said about Jews, Zionists, at some of the rallies. What have they done? What statements have they made? There's a huge failure.
I certainly accept that everybody, including the Human Rights Commission, including myself as Human Rights Commissioner, needs to do more.
It's exactly why we have a Human Rights Commission, to investigate behaviour such as this.
I think most importantly, we need to be very clear about condemning the anti-Semitic behaviour that we see and in calling it out for what it is.
Are we seeing echoes of the 1930s in the boycotting of Jewish businesses, the intimidation of the Jewish community, the violent demonstrations in Jewish suburbs?
We're seeing echoes of it. However, I believe we will in fact defeat it, because any echoes of the 1930s is pure evil, and I believe the vast majority of Australians simply wouldn't tolerate it.
Israel is in a war against Hamas, not the Palestinian people. And it's a real tragedy that so many innocent lives have been lost in both Israel and in Gaza. As horrific as the loss of human life was on October 7, so too were the incredibly shocking accounts of rape and torture at the hands of the Hamas terrorists.
With regard to the 7th of October attacks, we found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, occurred in at least 3 locations.
I do think that it took longer than it should have for people to come out and to decry this sexual violence, which was obviously so grievous.
And I have been really quite disgusted in the silence of women's group internationally. It's almost like, do Jewish women's lives not matter? When you're talking about babies being slaughtered and families bound together and burnt, I don't get how there's not been the outrage of that event.
The most systematic and violent campaign against European Jews accelerated in the early 1930s, before World War II began. Hitler and the Nazis sought to dehumanise, terrorise and eliminate the Jewish people. By 1945, 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children had been murdered. It's the darkest moment in human history.
The Holocaust, of course, teaches us where anti-Semitism leads if it's not confronted, that it didn't go from situation normal to gas chambers and Auschwitz in the blink of an eye.
When the war started, when we had to wear the Yellow Star of David, we couldn't go to school. You walked on the street, people could call your name because they've seen that you are a Jew. That is when you felt that you are different. When the war started, I was only 11 years old. The minute we arrived to Auschwitz, that was the last time I have seen my parents. They went to the left, I went to the right. I have got a picture, I have nothing. I couldn't even say goodbye. Can you imagine Auschwitz? Nobody ever believed that anything can happen like that.
I remember anti-Semitism in Europe as a small boy, and also I remember anti-Semitism after World War II. So now, as an 85-year-old man, to see evidence of anti-Semitism coming very strongly towards Australia is a big worry.
When you hear your father's story, and when you see the rise of anti-Semitism here in Australia, how do you feel?
It's heartbreaking. I've grown up knowing how accepting Australia was as a country to my dad. It gave him a new life. And then since October 7th, to have my children who attend a Jewish day school not be able to wear their uniform on an excursion because of the fear of being identified as Jewish, and then my 10-year-old asking me why is it bad if I'm identified as Jewish? And to have to explain that to her after everything that my dad's been through and all the survivors went through, it is absolutely heartbreaking.
Did you believe, after surviving the Holocaust, that you would ever feel unsafe in Australia simply because you were Jewish?
Never. I'm a proud Jew, and I don't deny my Jewishness ever, okay? But to see what is happening is terribly upsetting.
Because the unruly mob has been allowed to rule, because nobody has stepped in and said enough is enough. We're revisiting the 1930s.
I will survive, and I have survived and endured cruelty, hatred, and everything you can possibly imagine. Yet they could never take my spirit away, never.
At the moment, it is tremendous, terrible speeches, vitriolic speeches. If they speak too much about it, people will start to believe in it. And this must be stopped at all cost.
I think it's a failure to learn from history. It's a tragedy for me. It's a wake-up call, and I'm distressed about this. The age of innocence has been shattered for all of us.
If you had the opportunity to speak to the Australian Prime Minister, what would be your message?
We only want the best for this country, and you need to be a good leader. Lead. A leader is someone who takes risks too. So lead.
Do something. Do immediately. Stop the anti-Semitism.
My message is, get involved. stand up and say, this is wrong. We don't want this in our country.
Speak out on the right side of history.
What's your message to these Holocaust survivors who want to see even stronger leadership from the top?
That Australians stand with you, that we're honoured to have you as part of our Australian community, that you have gone through unimaginable horrors in your life, and that you honour us with your presence here and with the contribution that you have made.
That contribution makes the rapid rise of anti-Semitism even more difficult to comprehend, with the anxiety and fear it's creating in the local Jewish community. A vibrant community that has been here since the arrival of the First Fleet and has always reflected the very best of Australian values and citizenship.
You have to start with amongst the 7,000 or more Jewish people who have served in Australia's uniform. You have to start with Sir John Monash, the greatest Australian general ever.
Sir John Monash was a proud Jew from Melbourne. He played a critical role in the Allies' victory over Germany in the war to end all wars.
And a man who, at his own funeral, had 250,000 Australians turn out, a huge crowd in Melbourne to see him off.
From a small community making up less than half of 1% of our population, there have been many great Australian Jews who have helped build and strengthen our democracy and our society. Sir Isaac Isaacs, our first Australian-born Governor-General. Sir Zelman Cowen, who brought a touch of healing to the nation after the upheaval of the dismissal. Australian Jews have contributed greatly to the betterment of our nation as a whole.
In my personal experience, I've seen the Jewish community contribute to philanthropy, to the creative industries, to business, to nurturing a sense of community. So there aren't too many parts of Australian life that have been untouched.
The history of the Australian Jews that come out of nowhere and today are outstanding people for the benefit of the whole nation.
Lindsay Fox, who founded Australia's largest private transport company, is also a big giver.
I know at my time of life, in people I look at them as givers or takers. I put the Jewish community as givers.
And when it comes to anti-Semitism, Lindsay Fox has a simple, no-nonsense message.
Treat people the way you'd want to be treated, whether you're black, whether you're white, whether you're Jew, whether you're Arab. It's all the same, they're people.
Many in the Jewish community feel abandoned, and Israel, in its time of need, has not been warmly embraced. This is despite the fact that Australia and Israel have a long history based on shared values and interests.
One of the most important things to remember about Australia and Israel is that we have a lot in common. And, of course, we have a background in our common democracy. We have a background in the ethical underpinning of our societies.
Yep. Stay back, stay back.
Defence and security ties between the governments in Jerusalem and Canberra are also important.
Our experience in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Australian lives would have been lost but for the intelligence and the gathering and the support of the Israeli intelligence services.
They've been a very important intelligence partner for Australia. They have at times provided important information to Australian agencies, which has saved Australian lives.
We've thwarted terrorist attacks in our own country because of the intelligence provided to us by the Israeli people, and we should never forget that.
Israel does not exist because the Holocaust happened, but the Holocaust happened because Israel did not exist. And we must firmly push back on those who seek to misrepresent the term Zionism and undermine the legitimacy of the State of Israel, a beacon of democracy in a sea of hostility.
So I'm a Zionist.
I'm a Zionist in that I believe that people of the Jewish faith should have a homeland in their historic lands.
I get attacked because, you know, I get called a Zionist, and I'm not going to be intimidated.
I call myself a lover of what Israel has stood for and achieved. Do I call myself a Zionist? Well, if people think that amounts to being a Zionist, I'm a Zionist.
You obviously believe in the existence of the State of Israel. Does that make you a Zionist?
Well, of course it does, and it makes me a very strong supporter of a strengthened Israel.
Now, I support the State of Israel. I also support a two-state solution.
I certainly believe personally in the right of Israel to exist, and I think anyone who comes and looks at the circumstances in the Middle East today has to say that the long-term solution is Israel, its right to exist, secure borders, people living in safety and peace, alongside a Palestinian state where Palestinians are doing exactly the same, living behind secure borders in safety and peace.
Understanding the past is key to a better future. With more than half of our young people having little or no appreciation of the horrors of the Holocaust, education must be an immediate national priority.
So I want to see an education system where every Australian student visits a Holocaust museum to understand, to speak to the survivors and to the descendants of those people who lost their lives in those concentration camps.
I'd really want people to have the education to help them understand the World War II history, the history of Israel, the history of the region, and to therefore have the tools and ability to join the dots to what is happening today.
We are at a critical point in our history, with our values and our way of life under attack. This is Australia's fight, and to win, we need moral clarity, courage and conviction. We must defend what we have and who we are, with future generations relying on us, just as we have relied on the generations before us to secure the freedoms we now enjoy.
If we want this country to be the great country that it is, we need to unite together. We can't have a section of our society kicked to the curb because they're Jewish.
If you don't learn from history, you are in danger of repeating it.
A nation is never strengthened if it gives way to hatred or discrimination.
And the promise of Australia is the promise of a country where every single person is able to live freely and safely.
I think anti-Semitism is not part of a fair go, and Australians should wake up to that and reject it.
I believe Australia has an essential goodness there at our soul.
And we have to tap into that goodness. If we can do that together, I think the future will be bright.
We can win the fight against anti-Semitism, and win it we must.
Look, I'm worried, but ultimately here in Australia, I am an optimist for us. It won't happen unless we're clear-eyed about the nature of the problem and we come together and address it. I mean, one of the best things I got to do as Prime Minister is I'd go to a lot of schools. And inevitably, you would have school kids sing to you at some point.
We are one, but we are many.
I am, you are, we are Australians, and really, full stop, that's it.